Hello, guys, and welcome to my effective practice in assessments presentation on making formative assessments work in a primary classroom. We are going to go on a journey of making assessments work in the classroom, and I will focus on three main topics. The three main bullets I will focus on is formative assessments in the classroom, formative assessments and learning connected, issues educators face when implementing formative assessments. On this road trip, we will learn formative assessments continue to develop and change. According to Hall and Burke, studies show that assessments that are learning centered and geared to help learners make progress is a major characteristic of successful teachers' practice. Let's go on this road trip of assessments and learning. First, first focus I'm going to talk about is formative assessments in the classroom. We have 4 bullet points that drives this instruction. Assessments enhance the learning capacity. It provides adequate feedback. It drives the instruction, and it promotes rigor or reinforcement. Assessments that enhance the learning capacity can be used as a great tool for grading and scoring students. We use assessments to give students some grades, see where they are, score them, kind of get a gauge of, where they are, their weaknesses, and their strengths. During this time, we give them adequate feedback, which may be a conversation or something written on the assessment for students to gain some knowledge of what they need help on or what they have mastered. This also gives you some information on what you think the students have gained from the assessment and the learning target that was taught in class or during the unit. They use this assessment to direct the students' learning. When we drive the instruction, assessments can be a great tool to guide small and whole group. In my classroom, I use assessments to create my small groups. My small groups are created based on students' weaknesses, student strengths, what students need more reinforcement, and what students need more rigor. I also use it to see if students have learned the target, to move students in different areas. So, yeah, assessments can be very beneficial when placing students in small group or when we working in whole group. If you notice that the whole entire class had a hard time with the learning target, you could go back and reteach those skills and then see if they have grasped that concept. When we think of rigor and reinforcement, assessments can be awesome about showing students moving students into more rigor form, giving them more mastery tools on certain learning targets, or maybe even taking them to a whole nother learning dimension when you're focusing on a certain area. For example, my students are learning about subtraction, and I have some students that's ready to subtract double digit with a single number. So like a 12 minus 5, those I have high students ready for that. Whereas I'm still working with some of my reinforced students where they still may need to understand how to subtract 8 minus 0. So, based on my assessments, I know who I can provide rigor to and who I need to reinforce those concepts with. And I need to make sure that my assessment meets all the learning targets so my students have grasped that information and I know whether to move forward or to continue to work on those skills. Formative assessments and learning can be connected. Students can definitely benefit from formative assessments, and there are 2 kinds of assessments. You have planned formative assessments, which is a little more teacher driven, and interactive formative assessments, which is teacher and pupil interaction. Now, I got this information. There's 2 models that I'm going to show you, and it was models by Cowie, which break down these 2 different types of assessments. And they're great models that can show you how some assessments, which is planned, is a little bit more structured, where interactive can be a little bit more loose, easygoing, and it kind of gives it more of a student driven assessment rather than a teacher driven. The first one we're going to discuss is plan formative assessment. When I think about plan formative assessment, we think about assessment that really is permanent evidence of the thinking and of pupils and their assessments. It can be semi-formal, and it usually occur in the beginning or end of a topic. It's for a specific assessment activity, and it sets the purpose of furnishing evidence to improve learning. So when we look at the planned formative assessment, we look at these three areas: acting, listening, and interpreting. These are the purpose to improve the learning. When I use this, when I think of this, I really think of just pre and post assessments, and that's all you're using. Pre and post assessments, there's nothing else given. That's all you're using to drive your instruction. Whereas interactive formative assessment is a little bit more flexible and is more teacher pupil driven and ongoing. It can occur anytime, whether it's in whole group, small group, or individual. And the purpose is to improve the learning. This is a more teacher pupil driven rather than curriculum. It involves both parties to notice, recognize, and respond. So when we think of this, we think of these three areas: responding, noticing, and recognizing, which is your purpose. I would say this will focus on the observations, teacher student feedback, anecdotal notes, questioning. So with this one, this is more of students and teachers collaborating rather than the teacher just giving off what is going to happen. This is what it is, and I'm gonna use just this information to drive my instruction. Whereas interactive, you're using the information from the students and the teachers collaborating to make the instruction more meaningful. Now, of course, as educators, we're always going to face with some issues when we're implementing formative assessments. Four major issues that I have gathered from my peer review articles was using authentic assessments, developmentally appropriate testing, when is it too much, and meeting learning styles. When we say authentic assessments, we want to make sure our assessments are aligned with the learning target and standards. We don't want to just give out any type of assessments, and it really does not benefit the learning. The assessments that we give need to make sure that it's a concept that the students may be working on, or something that they have already gained information about. If it's a pre-assessment, that's a good time to start seeing where my students are, what they need to work on, what we can do to ensure that they are successful. After learning the target, we could give out assessments to see if they have gathered the information. But throughout the unit, we can also use different formative assessments, such as questioning, different projects, or even just, observation to see if they're gaining understanding. As a first grade teacher, I definitely want to make sure that my testing or any assessment given is developmentally appropriate. You don't want to give, of course, first grade students assessments that's second grade standards. That's not going to work. They're not going to understand that. So you want to make sure that all your testing is appropriate to the age group that you're giving it to, and they understand what the assessment is for and what are you trying to gain from it. When is it too much? I usually think of this when I was reading on this. Too much means when we're using the paper pencil method. Um, I don't, usually I've heard some teachers say they do it weekly. Um, I don't know. You really have to consider your students. When is it too much? But I'm not one. I'm not a teacher that like it paper and pencil all the time. I am one that like to use the variety of assessments to gather information so my students doesn't understand that it's a lot. Meeting learning styles, I make sure that definitely my assessments meet all the learning styles in my classroom, whether they're kinesthetic, hands-on, um, you know, they need you just need to meet all the styles that's in your classroom. Some students, they need to move around in questions, or need more information, or maybe need to sing it, or whatever you can do to gather what your students have learned and how they have grasped the information. I would definitely choose a variety of ways of giving out formative assessments, not just using pencil and paper. Well, that ends our journey with formative assessments in the primary classroom. These are my peer references and peer review articles that I use to get my research. I hope you enjoyed my presentation, and thank you so much for listening.